Hi, welcome to Little Pieces Club Ministries podcast. My name is Chris Polad. I'm known as Mr. Chris to the kids at Little Pieces Club small groups. I am a Bible nerd, a child of divorce, and author, and I created Little Pieces Club Ministries around the idea that when our hearts break, God can still make works of art from the broken pieces. I run small groups for children and teens and consult with and support parents. I also give lectures and seminars on request. The content centers around the science of adversity, abuse, and neglect, or ACE science, and how biblical design patterns harmonize with it. We are non-doctrinal and base our teachings on biblical scholarship. And along the way of this path, I discovered that Jesus' story, wrapped in the design patterns of the Good Shepherd and Tree of Life, help us process, grieve, forgive, and reintegrate our souls after trauma and relational toxicity. This helps us grow strong in solitude and community, and leading us and helps us love God, self, and others, which happen to be the most important blessings we can experience and give. The podcast is geared to help parents understand their children's point of view and to be a good shepherd and tree of life through the hard times. You can connect with us at www.littlepiecesclub.com. You can send us an email at littlepiecesministries@gmail.com, and then follow us on socials at LPC Ministries for Instagram, at Club Pieces on Twitter, and at Little Pieces Club on TikTok. We also have a YouTube video channel to look at all of our small groups and the videos that accompany the podcasts. We also have a Facebook site as well. So now let's get into this week's episode. And this week we are taking a deep dive into the Tree of Life metaphor. This is the second of two biblical metaphor episodes where we look at the biblical foundations for some of the deep driving metaphors that we refer back to often with Little Pieces Club. Last week was the Good Shepherd, and this follows 3 episodes that were very science-based. So what we're trying to do is to balance that science base with biblical foundation. But as always, context matters. So we're going to review a few aspects that we want to keep in mind as we enter into today's discussion of the Tree of Life. So first of all, LPC Ministries is committed to uncovering the synergy between modern adversity science and deep biblical design patterns. So as you saw last week, the Good Shepherd is one of those patterns that it interweaves itself quite a bit in what we now know is important for people who are recovering from trauma. Somewhat simplistically, they become lost sheep, and lost sheep need a shepherd. And so we find it fascinating that this design pattern has been available to humanity for 3,000 years. And so it's nice to see science uncovering the need for that. And so as we discussed last time, we make this journey from lost sheep to rescued sheep to being trained to be good shepherds, and then finally becoming good shepherds. And this week, what we're talking about is the Tree of Life, because Jesus is often described as a tree of life as well. Now, I think that this has been buried in a lot of what we tend to not talk about in the Western Christian church. So I hope you'll just keep an open mind to see that it has been staring at us right in the face. Remember also that attachment is extremely important when it comes to adversity and trauma recovery. And Little Pieces Club Ministries is about helping humans, which includes parents and children, blend that modern science with the biblical metaphor. And so attachment helps us defeat loneliness. One of the key features that is underlying much of the mental health troubles that we're having in our modern world is this idea of loneliness. So keep that in mind as we talk about both our private journey and our public journey, because as we engage with other people, that is how we defeat loneliness. And that is done through attachment. And then remember the Good Shepherd and how it helps defeat attachment. But also now we have the Tree of Life, where we begin to build a paradigm of ourselves and how we can even be patient with ourselves as we grow from a seedling to a sapling to a young tree to a mature tree. So this timing really should help us both individually feel more confident in our ability to grow and mature, and then give that sense to our children as we live through adversity and other aspects of the divorce. So remembering that Jesus had 7 I am statements in the book of John, and the first, of course, we talked about was the Good Shepherd. Then there was the bread of life, which connected to that idea. The way, the truth, and the life was the path that the Good Shepherd leads us on. The gate of the sheepfold is where Jesus allows folks to come into the kingdom of God. And then the resurrection and the life, because the Good Shepherd lays down his life for his sheep, and is the light of the world. And here we see a small pivot where God was the Good Shepherd of the Israelites in the desert, and he lit in a pillar of fire their way and was their Good Shepherd in that fashion. But we also now see a blending of metaphors where the light of the world becomes the light for the trees that are growing, the trees of life that are growing. And finally, we see the true vine, and this is a direct link to a agricultural / plant-based metaphor that then links back, as you're going to see in just a minute, to the tree of life. So feel free to pause today's presentation, video, or podcast and go to thebibleproject.com and find their Tree of Life video. In about 7 to 8 minutes, they go through a lot of what we're going to be going through today, but is just presented in such a beautifully artistic way in their video. So I highly recommend it. And as I've said before, Bible Project is reliable and accessible for biblical study, and we always point people in their direction. And as they were going through their podcasts discussing the Tree of Life video, they mentioned this book, Reforesting Faith, What Trees Teach Us About the Nature of God and His Love for Us, by Matthew Sleeth. So feel free to look up this book and enjoy it to further get the sense that this Tree of Life analogy is quite active and powerful. So just like Kenneth Bailey in his work, The Good Shepherd, pointed out a 1,000-year journey of the Good Shepherd being developed in the Bible, we're going to take a little bit of that same journey with the Tree of Life. So I am not a scholar to the tune of Kenneth Bailey, but I'm just going to present the passages from the Bible that help us see that we're not making this up when we talk about the Tree of Life. So in Genesis, we see very early on, out of the ground the Lord caused every tree to grow that is pleasing to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And so when we look at this, we can meditate on a couple of different ideas. And as we'll see a little bit later, God formed humans from the earth. And just like that, he formed trees from the earth as well, or out of the ground, the trees sprouted. And the other thing is, the tree of life was also in the midst of the garden. And so we can look at this metaphorically and wonder if this also meant that Jesus was in the garden. But that's a meditative thought that we can kind of keep in our minds as we go through this. So next in Genesis 3:22, after the fall, then we see, then the Lord God said, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil, and now he might reach out with his hand and take fruit also from the tree of life, and eat and live forever." So many look at this as a punishment that God is putting on humanity by putting them out of the garden where they are not allowed to eat of the tree of life. And there is, through, again, Bible projects looking at this in context, has pointed out the fact that to allow humans to live forever in a fallen state is actually not good. So God makes the best of the situation and leads them away from the tree of life and tries to then go through a process of redeeming them in other ways. So next we're going to jump to Psalm 1, verses 1 through 3. "Blessed is the person who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand in the paths of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He will be like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in the season, and its leaf does not wither. And in whatever he does, he prospers." So now we start to see this idea of the tree of life being grafted onto humans in their behavior and loyalty towards God. And now in Mark, so we've moved from the Hebrew Scriptures to the New Testament, Mark 8, chapter 8, verse 24. "He looked up and said, I see people, for I see them like trees walking around." So again, we see an underscoring of the fact that we can see people as trees. And now we jump forward to Revelation 22, verse 2. "In the middle of its street, on either side of the river," which was the river of life, flowing with the water, the living water, "was the tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations." So remember all the way back to the early passages of Genesis where we see the table of nations set. And this table was connected to the people groups that were scattered after Babylon tried to build its tower, and God had to scatter the people. He also put those people under principalities, which were various spiritual beings in the divine council. And so what we see now is the tree of life is now ready to heal the nations that were scattered from that the aftermath of the Tower of Babel. So we see this bringing back together of these nations under this tree of life. So then, who is this tree of life that we're talking about? Well, clearly in this revelation, the metaphor connects back to Jesus. So now the question is, what did Jesus say about the tree of life? So in John 12:24, we see this "truly, truly," which is a Hebrew way of adding emphasis, which is doubling the word. So "truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone, but if it dies, it bears much fruit." So it doesn't take too much of a leap to see Jesus is describing what will happen to him, where he goes into the earth for 3 days and then springs forth. Jesus is the tree of life, and this is Jesus linking himself to that design pattern that we're talking about today. So then Jesus again spoke to them, saying, "I am the light of the world. The one who follows me will not walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life." So we remember that trees grow when they are exposed to light. So as we've seen, humans are also trees of life, and they need to be exposed to light. So therefore we have Jesus. Next, Jesus answered and said to her, which was the woman at the well, "Everyone who drinks of this physical water, will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give them shall never be thirsty, but the water that I will give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up to eternal life. So that's John chapter 4, verses 13 and 14. Again, if we listen to this passage with the tree of life metaphor running in our meditations in the background, we can see that roots will need to connect with this water. And then we can let our imaginations run wild about what happens to a tree that has this type of water deep in their root structure. And then we go to the parable of the sower. But the one sown with seed on the good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and produces, some 100, some 60, and some 30 times as much. So again, we see the tree of life running in the background as producing fruit. And we also see that some will produce more than others. And we can see this in nature when we look at trees. And we should also realize that that is not a reason to feel shame if you're producing less than someone else. So then we have a question. What is the soil that the seed of Jesus will be planted into? Well, if you notice, I skipped over a verse from Genesis, and we can then look at it right now. So Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. Then the Lord God formed the man from dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living person. And so then the soil that Jesus can also be part of is our heart. And therefore, once he takes root and springs forth his life-giving wisdom and love, we can be part of that process. So just meditating on this whole process is super important for us. And this is one of the reasons why I use this for the Little Pieces Club logo, is it is a tree of life that we see roots. We also see rocks. So these could be easily the idols in the world that our roots must then grow past, grow around, take control of, and then later on hit into the living water. And roots themselves reflect our journey in solitude because they're below the surface where others cannot see. And we are also growing in community, which means that when we're in our younger state, our state where things are not always as optimal as they can be, that we are still in view of others. And so again, my hope is that this helps us have less shame and expectations when we are parenting children and looking at ourselves. And remember that the light comes from Jesus. The other thing in this picture to note is that there is another tree, a bigger tree behind us. And yes, that is meant to represent Jesus. And then the good soil, or the soil that God formed us from, is another part of the picture, as is the living water that is depicted on the bottom of this picture. So then it's important to remember, as we're talking about the tree of life and even going back to the Good Shepherd, is that we have an idea of what the most important rules of life are. And these are the greatest blessings. This is where we recognize God's sovereignty and the fact that he is the creator and he is deserving of our loyalty and for us to follow him. And so in order to do that, we need to see and acknowledge his existence. And then again, be willing to admit that he is a sovereign. He is the sovereign in the universe. And then we realize, though, that he made us in his image. So we are to be image bearers of this royalty. And we can see ourselves that way. And then we are to see the same in other people. Notice that in this picture that the hearts are on the same level. And then we also remember the created world plays a part in our lives and that we are blessed when we take care of that created world. And that when our identity is centered on loving God and others as ourselves, that is where we are truly blessed. And from that, we will then radiate and hopefully learn patience and kindness, which are the two first descriptors in the famous 1 Corinthians passage of love, being patient and kind. And remember, with attachment-based parenting, we first have to apply patience and kindness to be able to help our children. So now we're going to spend a lot of time making this tree of life metaphor that is very clear in scriptures, very practical for us as parents and for you guys recovering from divorce. So this is the schematic of how the tree of life factors into the curriculum that we developed in small groups for the children of Little Pieces Club Ministries. You can see that in solitude, that is, again, below the surface. The community is then above the surface. And then we realize that there are skills that we develop over time that help us thrive in both realms. So we call below the surface the private Christian journey, and above the surface the public Christian journey. And we realize all of us are on this journey in one way or another. But before I get too far into the roots and the branches, I want to focus on the centerpiece. And that is, we need especially to parent and also treat ourselves with the idea that we are overcoming shame. For particularly traumatized kids or those that have grown up with a lot of relational violence or relational conflict, one of the biggest issues that they have to deal with is shame. And this shame will drive anxiety because at our core, we are conscientious people. And if we feel that we are defective, the best thing to do then is to save other people from having to deal with us. And so we tend to hide our deepest selves. And when we come up against this, say in relationship, it can drive our anxiety. So we have to overcome this idea that we are defective. And we do that, hopefully, by connecting with God's basic idea, which is that we are intrinsically important and worthy of His love. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't make mistakes, but at our core, we are lovable. We are able to receive His love and learn how to give that love and feel that love in our hearts and give it to other people. And part of that process is grieving and forgiving. This idea that we will have losses, we will have things that we should have experienced that don't, and that we haven't, and that we suffer through. But in all of this, we realize that we are never alone when we suffer. We have God to be with us, who then can train us to suffer well with others. And a lot of that includes forgiveness. So now let's take a closer look at the particular skills that we are talking about that happen in the roots. So first and foremost is discovering and embracing our power to choose. And this is to develop our self-awareness, our conscience, independent will, and creative imagination that helps us look at choices in front of us and make good choices. And oftentimes this is very difficult because if we feel completely that we have been an object of others outside of us, then realizing that we do have some choice in the matter is often something that brings great shame. So remember, this idea of self-forgiveness should be running in the background. And then one of the choices that we get to make is to accept God's existence and then getting to know Him. And so we regularly would meditate on Scripture to find God's wisdom and to understand His character. And then once we did that, another thing that we would be thinking about is choosing to follow what God has asked us to do. And this starts with the greatest blessings. He's simply asking us to love Him, to love others as we love ourselves. And so we developed that idea in the Little Pieces Club curriculums. As if you've reviewed the first season's podcast, you'll get it there. Also, when we're in solitude, we discover that we matter to God. And again, this helps us overcome this idea of shame, and that we choose to receive his love and spirit as free gifts. And this is where we begin to learn the value of free gifting and the fact that we're going to do that in community as well. We can also invite God to transform us. And that is, for older people, we realize that we have this shadow, this darkness that has come with us through various experiences growing up. And so we can choose to ask God to transform that. And then one of the foundational pieces to this root structure, and especially that we can implement as parents, is this idea of Sabbath and renewal. And so 1 out of every 7 days, the Old Testament tells us, that is to be set aside as a day to rest from dehumanizing work and delight in the gifts that God has given us as a foreshadowing of what is to come when God's final day arrives. And so we can make sure that we are doing renewal in mind, body, heart, and spirit through various different ancient biblical practices. And we use one of those in each of the podcasts called Lectio Divina. And we also do examination of conscience in the small groups. So you've seen now that I have incorporated those in our curriculum. And then in a much more modern idea is we need to discover our identity with God in mind. There is so much right now about identity that we need to remember that if we are truly embracing God's character and we embrace the way he sees us, that our identity is rooted in being his children. And so this includes spiritually and physically, and it also helps us ask questions about how we express ourselves, including gender. And then going over to the other side of the curve, or the other side of the slide, we talk about private discipleship. And this is discovering what our mission is. And this, we could have several missions, and we could be discovering several over time. For you as a parent who is experiencing divorce, perhaps you could see your mission as becoming strong in this new reality so that you can shepherd your children. And then once that is done, or you have mastery of that, God perhaps will reveal a different mission for you. Next is determining the blueprint on how you are to understand that mission. And in a tree of life setting like this, that is discerning God's input into your private blueprint. And then putting that blueprint into place using all 4 endowments of self-awareness, conscience, independent will, and creative imagination, putting that blueprint into place with all of those endowments, including integrity, love, and wisdom. And then running in the background, all of these happen by intentionally building a secure attachment to God. And so some of these can be presented sequentially, but I really look at these as individual skills that will grow over time as our roots deepen and find that living water. Now, on the cultural side, we have doing the basic idea of renewal, but having fun, laughing, and playing with other people. And so and we do this, of course, with God's gifts in mind. Also on this trunk is respecting interpersonal power. That is seeking integrity with others, building others up in truth and not tearing them down, and being aware of how your power influences someone else, and being able to navigate someone else's power as it influences you. Remember, I say influence, not determine. So we're basically talking about, on the trunk and branches side of this equation, knowing cultural rules. Finally, on this trunk aspect, we see community discipleship, and that is helping other trees grow. And we'll get back into that as we talk about parenting. And then the other main concept that we look at up in the branches of the tree here is the Ezer Kenegdo concept. And that is, how do we be a challenging helper for other people? And that is lovingly providing them opportunities to grow. And so first and foremost, we think about being in a win-win-win mindset and finding the wisdom that allows us to live out the greatest blessings by loving God, others, as self. And so that we can see as win-win-win thinking. Then we can listen to other people first for understanding, and then courageously include ourselves in the discussion. So this is a balancing curiosity with courage. That is a unique skill that we need when we engage with other people. And next we look at choosing synergy. And that's the idea that people together working toward a solution are much better than one person on their own. So that if one person has an idea, another person has an idea, that's going to result in a much better reality. It's like 1 + 1 = 4 or 5 than if two were to work on their own. And even compromise is not what we're talking about when we talk about synergy. Synergy is something truly better than two can think of on their own. And you can hear, if those of you who know Stephen Covey, you can hear in the background the framework that he laid out in the private victory and public victory. And some of these skills are very similar to what Covey mentioned. I just link them all together with this biblical metaphor of the tree of life running in the background. So let's get on to parenting. And there's a couple of things that I'm mentioning today where the tree of life helps us parent. But please understand that this is a metaphor meant for hours upon hours of meditation. So having it running in the background as we're parenting our children will and should give you way more insight than I can in this short podcast. But coming from a pediatrician, there's a few things that stand out when we try to apply the tree of life metaphor to parenting children. And that is, first of all, treat a seed like a seed. Don't treat in the moment a seed like they are a full-grown tree. And that requires you understanding in the first place that they are a seed and they are developing. Because one of the things that kids really get triggered by is when parents are expecting in a hard way them to behave in a way that they are not yet ready for. And that will increase this idea of shame and increase the frustration and potentially anger that the kids have. And so do not treat them like a full-grown tree if they are a seed or a sapling. Now, I'm going to reverse what I just said, in a small way here. Goethe said, treat people as they can be, and they will become as they can be. Treat them as they are, and they will stay as they are. So this is a little bit of a mixed message. I just told you to treat seeds like seeds. And that's kind of in the day-to-day treatment and management of your children. But overall, never forget that they are becoming like trees of life and good shepherds. If you are going to fully embrace the metaphor, that's the case. And so always remember that that's kind of the path that you're directing them on, but then just focusing on the fact that you're just helping them take the next step where they're at. And overall, they need the sense that they are loved and valued despite their behavior, but you're there to help guide them through the behavior in a very connected and loving, patient and kind way. And so realize, though, that part of the Hebrew thinking is being able to hold two separate ideas in the same hand. So we don't want to treat a seed like it is a full-grown tree, but we also don't want to lose sight of the fact that that seed will one day become a full-grown tree. And we can subtly give that communication to the kids as we're parenting them. So just as a reminder, we're looking at our slide of the greatest blessings and the wisdom points that help us live out the greatest blessings. That reminds us that hope, biblical hope, which is sometimes irrational hope that God has our back and is working for our good. The idea that we need to understand and or teach grief, and that grieving process ends in forgiveness. And that in order to truly listen to another person, we need to be able to cultivate a mindset and a heart set of submission. And to be in right relationship with other people is that win-win-win relationship. And that we look out for aspects of justice, and that is treating people who have no power with dignity and grace is very important. And then wisdom helps us live all of this out. So just a reminder that those are the helpful concepts that are embedded in the scriptures that we can use. So as I went over the very big tree of life drawing, remember with parenting that we can help children embrace their ability to choose. And so in good teaching moments, we can always support a child's ability to make a choice between two different things. And we can even make sure that they understand that they have those particular choices. And we can, and this will ultimately allow them to realize that they can choose God and that they can choose forgiveness. Those are some big concepts that they have choice over. As we are supporting them in this idea of choice, we can also support them and teach them that they can stop and think about something. And in what Covey's language was, to stop and take that space between stimulus and response. And I will tell you that kids that undergo trauma or severe adversity or relational toxicity over time, they feel very reactive. And so that means they kind of make a snap judgment and move on that. So being able to intentionally teach them to take a moment and to look inwardly and to ask themselves a question and to wait for the answer is a very, very important skill that you can add to your parenting. So next is the idea of blueprints and priorities, and that is plans and priorities. What is most important? When they're stopping to think about their choices, they can also think about what's most important to them in that moment. And then you can help them balance that with what's going on in a community setting. And remember that the idea behind a blueprint is that we can measure twice and cut once. And that is, once we cut, we can't go back. So again, helping them understand how they can choose in certain circumstances is very, very important. And one of the most important, and this is science-based again, that we can do with children is to help them understand innately this idea of Sabbath. And that is that living water that our roots require is really made best and penetrates deepest when we are having fun, when we are having laughter and play. So really, it's very important, especially in the divorce or post-divorce setting, that you set aside time for kids to have fun, to laugh and play. And that is with friends, but also it's very important that they do that with you. So if you don't know what your kids need for laughter and play, you need to study them, you need to meditate, and you guys need to set aside time on how to have fun, laugh, and play for at least 10 to 15 minutes every day. And then set aside a longer time weekly to do the same thing. Okay, so now we're going to switch our parenting comments to branches. And that is, we use light to grow. And just like the greatest blessings say to love, and that First Corinthians tells us that to be loving is to be patient and kind, curiosity and instruction trump judgment and correction. So try as most often as you can to use curiosity and instruction to help children. So if they do something that seems to be really odd, in terms of kind of really slamming the door on what they're doing now, if bodily safety is a problem, we need to watch out for that. But aside from that, being very, very intentional about being curious about them is important. So I'm going to tell a quick story. When we were in Africa, when both my daughters were younger, my youngest was about age 6. And I saw her walking around the grounds of one of the church partners that we were visiting. And she was picking up glass and putting it in the area that the drain, in essence. It was an open drain area. And it caught my attention, but something in me said, wait a minute, don't reflexively correct her or punish her for picking up glass. So what I did instead is I came up right next to her and I said, honey, what are you doing? And she said, Daddy, I'm picking up glass because the children here don't have shoes and I don't want them to step on glass. So thankfully, the curiosity and instruction side of things won the day here. And I got I would have missed out on an incredibly important picture of my daughter's heart if I had just told her to stop picking up glass. So I then made sure that we were doing it with the utmost care and really praised her for what she was doing. So remember, if you are in a reactive state and you do not ask the question behind the behavior, then you will miss out on the heart and the truth of what's going on in your kid's mind that drives that behavior. So now, with the tree metaphor, there is this idea of pruning. And so the basic parent idea connected to the tree of life is to prune with care. And that is, if you do need to provide some type of correction, do it with gentleness. And remember that challenge, which is pruning, and the metaphor here is that pruning will actually bring forth more fruit. And Jesus even talks about the fact that God will prune him. I just didn't pull out that scripture today. So just remember that challenge is not suffering, and chopping, though, stunts growth. So we want to prune gently. We can always prune back a little bit more of our kids' behaviors if need be. But remember, if you chop really hard, that's going to set their growth back, and perhaps even in ways that you won't even be able to see. Remember also that you are a tree of life and that you need to model the branches and healing fruit that you're expecting your children to one day be able to model. So, and remember, it takes several years for trees to become ready to bear fruit. And that also includes being able to forgive, to happily choose to sacrifice in the moment, to apologize and listen, and as I talked about, to be curious rather than judgmental. And always also keep the idea of the Ezer Kenegdo challenging helper in mind, so that challenge is okay, being courageous and making sure that your part of the narrative is very important. Last but not least, remember that it does take a forest, that you are not alone, and you should not find yourself for very long feeling alone. Always remember that there are other trees that can help you understand your little trees as you're raising them up with love, with light, finding living water, and then pruning them when need be. That this happens within a community always. So that brings us down to wrapping up today's concepts. So we spent a lot of time biblically in the Tree of Life idea, tried to talk about some practical parenting ideas as we run this tree meditation in the background. So spend a little time in a journal, just maybe even drawing a tree and allowing you to see what your root system is strong in and maybe what your root system needs some help in. Same with your branches. How are you at being an Ezer Kenegdo, being patient and kind, listening to others before you courageously let yourself into the conversation, and so on and so forth. How is your private Christian journey? How is your public Christian journey? And realize that at the end of the day, you are important no matter what. Even if you have things that your tree of life needs to grow into, if you're not fully bearing fruit yet, it's okay. And allow those ideas of self-forgiveness and patience and kindness to set in with your own tree. And now we'll move into Lectio Divina for this week. So we're going to take the Psalm, the first Psalm, verses 2 and 3 for our Lectio verse for this week. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He will be like a tree planted by the streams of water, which yields its fruit in the season. So first of all, law is actually Torah. Torah means instruction. So we're going to reread this with that idea in mind. But his delight is in the instruction of the Lord, and on his instruction he meditates day and night. He will be like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in its season. So we're going to focus on be like a tree planted by streams of water. So we're going to reflect on this as we read it one more time or another time. But his delight is in the instruction of the Lord, and on his instruction he meditates day and night. He will be like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in its season. So then we get to respond to being a tree planted by the streams of water. And I'm going to respond to this by allowing that metaphor to take shape in my mind, to see myself quietly sitting next to a stream, feeling that cool water enter into my being, and just allow that to bring joy into my being, and even seeing the sun as well. So I'm going to respond to this by letting that metaphor reach deep into my thinking. But his delight is in the instruction of the Lord, and on his instruction he meditates day and night. He will be like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in its season. And next I get to rest in the idea that I am a tree of life, learning to be one like Jesus, and one who will eventually yield fruit that will heal the nations. And I let that joy take hold in me as I rest my head on the lap of my good shepherd. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law or instruction he meditates day and night. He will be like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in its season. So I hope you have been enjoying these Lectio times to help reinforce the lessons and the metaphors that we're talking about. So as we close this episode with prayer, I just want to thank you for spending time with this ministry. And I truly hope that it's a gentle time for you to consider some chaotic aspects of life and to find some patience, some kindness, some love that can just help your soul so that you can help the souls of others, including your children. So I do appreciate you and really encourage you to reach out through our email and submit any questions that you can or that you have that I can work on and answer for. Dear Heavenly Father, despite our chaos, Lord, we know you are in control. We are so blessed that you are our good shepherd and our tree of life. We ask that you help the concept of the tree of life take root in the soil of our hearts. May we be reminded every time we look at trees that you are whispering to us that we are like that. May the tree of life remind us of patience and that trees take years to develop. Grow our roots deep, Lord. Help us grow around and subdue the rocks of this world's idols on our way to deeper penetrating the soil and finding the living water flowing from your Son, Jesus. We cannot wait for that living water to bring forth the leaves and healing fruit in our own tree of life. May we be so beautiful that people are drawn to us and we to them. May this deep knowledge transfer to our children. May they grow up proud of their roots and hopeful of the fruit that they will one day produce. Grant us the wisdom to raise them as trees of life. In your name we pray, amen. Again, we are Little Pieces Club Ministries, and we look forward to any questions that you have. The next several episodes will be looking deeply at questions that divorced parents struggle with. Until then, have a great week.